Well, I'm not sure how this is going to go. I think I'm recording now. Sitting here on my laptop by the ocean, and that always has a lot of unwanted sounds. But this is where I've done most of my thinking, in this very spot here, and it's a favorite place of mine to be. I come here and say my prayers in the morning, and I swim here in the ocean often, and it's been a place during the pandemic that I finished my books that I'm trying now to promote, or at least finish the first book, and the second one later. And rather than looking at me any longer, that's me there, let's have a look at the ocean, and I'll talk into the microphone and see if this is going to be keepable. I think holding this is the best idea, but I don't know if I have a better one. Yeah. This is William the Samaritan, aka Teleologic Jones, and I'm doing a promotional video for my ideas, basically. I mean, I have a couple of books that I've produced, published on Kindle POD. They are books that challenge the orthodox scientific consensus in significant ways. And in fact, in essential and very fundamental ways. Now, me being a person of no note in this world, and even in that area of inquiry, I would understand that people wouldn't be particularly interested in reading them unless they are in some way enticed to consider that perhaps even for my lack of credentials, I have accomplished something at least of curiosity. And this I most surely believe that I have done. There's a lot of talk in traditional Christian movements, especially traditional Catholic movements, about the erosion to the faith that comes with naturalism. This naturalism is deep in our society. It is the fundamental assumption of modern society, is that the world is purely a naturally occurring, it's hard to say it as a single thing, that the world is naturally occurring, and that it is completely comprehensible within a material ontological setting. In other words, all that is matter and its attending energies, and that all that is can be understood as being some manifestation of that matter and its attending energies. I sometimes refer to this in my writing as either the monad of the physical or the monad of the material. So if we're to make a definition of naturalism, it would be that. It's to say that the world is self-contained materially. It doesn't require exterior metaphysical support. It only needs support from within itself. That it is an expression of material, well, that it is a material expression without any need for metaphysical inputs. Of course, metaphysical inputs imply divine inputs. And that to this we become quite clear that why there is this condition that we're in, that the metaphysical is very much marginalized and made small against the material. Metaphysical is simply, in many ways, just conceptual abstraction of material being, and not a force or energy in and of itself. And both kinds of metaphysics exist. There are conceptual metaphysics, but I would like to also say that there is affect metaphysics. That is, metaphysics that cause being, not metaphysics merely that are a summation of being. In other words, that they are effect metaphysics, metaphysics that are summaries of material things, versus that they are the willful intentions in generating material things. No, this of course is all just a lot of talk unless we have some kind of grounding in the real to anchor them in. So, this is exactly what my work is about. I consider myself a natural philosopher, not a scientist, though I do believe that I use scientific technique and method and the same, or at least analogous, or the same principles that science does, and or at least should use in drawing its conclusions. But I would say that science is too narrow in its purview. On the one hand, and yet it makes, because it fails to be a philosophical system, it tends to make broad, sweeping philosophical claims for which it has no real capacity to do. But it's left doing that because it's overthrown both philosophy and theology. So because it's overthrown philosophy and theology, it thinks that it can quite lazily, or at least those who are its boosters think that they can quite lazily just make blanket assumptions about the state of the world without much of any sort of proper argumentation to ground or to found this understanding, their understandings. But again, we're talking talk and not showing anything in particular. Is that seagull in my film? I hope so. Nope. Oh, most definitely that seagull is in my film. Very nice. I love seagulls. They're well-dressed scavengers. There's a metaphor for much of modern life. We are all in many ways well-dressed scavengers these days. Goodbye, my friend. He didn't like being insulted like that. And the truth hurts. It's true. So, how can we begin to ground these questions a little bit more firmly than just in would-bes and could-bes? Well, naturalism in its victory, we can see historically, and in my first book, The Restoration, New Contemplations in Christian Natural Philosophy. Naturalism's root is, I think, is shown to be, and I don't think this is actually a very controversial idea, at least it is one that is put forward certainly by proponents of naturalism, that the transformation starts with Copernicus and then it goes through to Newton. I mean, there are others in between, but we have an overthrow of an order, or at least a disruption by Copernicus, which is, in my thinking, I think, a soundly defended conception of the cosmos, or at least of the solar system. That the sun is the focus of the motions of the planets, and that the Earth is the third such planet orbiting the sun, and that there are other planets that orbit the sun further out from the Earth, and that his system is the one that seems to, or does, account for these motions most accurately. A flat Earth just simply does not account for these motions. Though there are some queries that the flat earthers bring up that do merit consideration. I wouldn't say their solutions merit consideration, or at least I don't think they stand up to scrutiny. But their critique of present cosmology is perfectly valid. Because on the other hand, though, while the Earth is within this motion of around the sun and rotating upon its own axis to the Earth, by our experience of being here on Earth, there is no movement. There is certainly not the movement that one would expect within a purely material or physical relationship. There are many ways in which we can critique this, and I do this in a couple of ways in the book, but there are many ways to demonstrate that the Earth is actually to itself still, that it presents as a concept unto itself, and regardless of its motion relative to other bodies, it is not moving to itself, but is kept in a context as being an inertial self-reference. And this is not an idea that has been put forward very robustly, as far as I know. It is very much a creation idea, that it is by divine intention that the world is formed, and that the other planets are formed. That in fact their spherical form is an indication of rational intention, not natural or accidental conglomeration. And this brings us back to the Newtonian provision in the victory of sort of science over theology. Though Newton himself was a theist of sorts, he was not an orthodox theist. He was very much a heterodox or even heretical theological contemplator. But he did believe that God was the maker of all things. He was in no way an atheist, and he was in no way he was in no way a deist. He was a theist. For whatever errors he may have had within that general conception, he believed that God was the maker. But he did have a bent towards the physical and the material. He did indeed, it seems, lay the groundwork for the material world being taken as a thing that we should be able to understand completely on its own, without any reference to anything outside of itself. And that is the assumption that we live under now, and that is the naturalistic worldview. And from a theological perspective, this is the division between those who see the Creator and those who see the creature, those who worship the creature rather than the Creator. when you, as a rational being, see the created order and understand that it must be made by a rational being, then you see the maker behind the made. But by the naturalistic worldview, there is no maker. The thing that is made itself. I mean, there are many variations to this, and there's always a little bit of footsie played with, reason and maths and such, that these things are eternal or that they exist outside of the material being. But how is this possible? I'm not going to get into that part of the argumentation, at least not now, because that's already been done and well, and I would rather introduce what I think it is that I am providing as something unique to the conversation. And so the Newtonian provision is mutual mass attraction. That objects of mass are attracted to each other as objects of mass for reasons unknown, still unknown, unclaimed, undiscovered in any way by experimentation. It's just assumed that objects of mass are attracted to each other as objects of mass. And what this does is it creates an understanding of being that tells us that matter takes care of itself. That from within the realm of matter, within the realm of the material, we have sufficient explanation for the conglomeration, the amalgamation of the bodies of the cosmos, and we have also sufficient explanation for their motion relative to each other as a purely material motion. Now, Einstein, or a materially motivated conglomeration in motion. Now, Einstein modifies this somewhat, and people are beginning to sort of push Newton aside, though philosophically this may be more problematic than they understand. Einstein's, we won't get into that right now either, but Einstein's variation does not overthrow the material monad. It only flirts more directly with metaphysics, but by saying that those metaphysical transformations are driven by material things. In other words, the presence of matter warps space-time. And this is what causes gravitational fields and so forth. I have also another book out, which is available, called Relativity Revisited, where I bring into doubt the special theory of relativity through very plain spoken and plain written, plainly conceived notions that show that we can account for all relative delay in perception within the realm of absolute space-time and without any kind of recourse to exotic notions of warped space-time, or that time is somehow taking place at different paces at different places. Certainly within the material realm, there is no need to understand that. In other realms, obviously I have no experience of these things, and I cannot make any claims whether or not time passes the same in different metaphysical realms, of which I only can fantasize the existence of, or infer the existence of, or believe in and trust the existence of. But in terms of this material space that I live in, what can I learn from here? And that brings us back to where we started. That the world infers a creator. And by this I mean it infers it more than just in this general sense, which is very true. I mean, it's very true, just in the most basic sense, at the most simple level of contemplation that any person, certainly any believer, can have, is they look at the world and they say, wow. Like even just this little snippet scene of it we're looking at here, wow. How did this come to be and organize itself? And how did it there must be a maker of it. That's the most basic way. Of course, this doesn't satisfy a deeper kind of philosophical question, although it does, but it is made to be somewhat in doubt by a deeper philosophical understanding, or questioning, or supposedly deeper. And the question then is, okay, well, what happens when we do take a deeper look at these things? To look at the world more closely, even mathematically, will it reveal that it is a self-contained material monad? Or will it reveal that the world is necessarily dependent on the substance of the divine substance? And whatever metaphysical intentions the divine being expresses, manifests by his will. So there are two approaches that I have to my work. One is to critique the Newtonian hypothesis of mutual mass attraction, and the other is to posit an alternative hypothesis or conception or model, which is really only inferred from that which can be observed without really extending beyond that. The hypothesis of mass attraction is unnecessary to explain either the cohesion and conglomeration of physical structures, nor is it necessary in the explanation of the motion of the cosmological bodies relative to each other. All we know is that they move. If we posit a notion for their motion, and at the same time say we have no idea how it does it, well, we haven't posited anything. Unless, of course, it is implied in the math of those, or the modeling of that, of those motions. And the question then, is it? Well, I believe that I've proven quite conclusively that it is not. That mutual mass attraction is a failed concept at explaining what is called gravitational attraction, or gravitational motion, or however we wish to look at it. So the implications, of course, are enormous of this. We'll continue more in detail explaining these things in time, but this is just an introduction. It's probably a bit rambly. I would probably do better with somebody asking me questions in an interview, so that I wasn't just sort of left to my own wandering mind. But perhaps in time, somebody will take interest. The rot of naturalism in the church is deep. It is so pervasive and destructive to faith. It is almost impossible to have escaped it. I certainly, when I made my discoveries, was chastened quite soundly by the things that I found, because I discovered that the naturalistic world that I lived in, even though I thought I lived in a supernatural world, I had lived quite deeply in a natural world. I had, through the course of my faith life in this confused world, having been raised in a Protestant sect when I was younger, and then spending quite a bit of time as an Anglican in a Protestant, in a high Protestant sect. Both of them were very much affected by naturalism, and the corruption of it, even in the faithful expressions of the faith, is so deep, so pervasive. It is, as I say, it's almost impossible to have escaped it. I think there are very few, if any, who have escaped. Even those who fight it and make the faith claim that they believe in the supernatural. You find even within this you have a kind of corruption when it comes to consideration of certain material things. But I don't wish to only make accusations like that. It's just a warning of humility that when we come to this, and part of the reason is that we've been told that there is such a thing as this material world that is self-maintained. We are told that God made it. But if it is sort of made by him and sort of takes care of itself, and it has forces all within it, and he's just sort of an inertial memory of the thing, that's not the same faith as the God who is infused throughout being, material being, that he is the continued maker and sustainer of all things. That's a far closer view of God. And it's one thing to hold that in your head or to write it down on paper and to assent to it even in a prayer. It's another thing to really thoroughly own that, to conceive that, to with your heart understand what that means. So that there is no separation between ourselves and God. That all that is only here by his continued being. It's not something he made and can walk away from. It's not something that in and of itself has the capacity to be or to organize itself. I see a lot of this in the secular world, where the worship of the material is found in scientific discovery, and it's found in medical advancement and so forth. This belief that, because we find out something neat about the material world, we praise the material world for its being somehow. It's absurd, but it's what's done. Rather than adoring the creator, not the creature. The thing that made the thing, not the thing that is made. And this goes back to the Psalms. David's praising the Maker, both for making himself, being fearfully and wonderfully made, and for making and holding in the being of the world. He lived in a thoroughly theistic, theocentric, theo-infused world in which there was no division. But we have grown up in a world in which there is this radical division. Partly when we're in social spaces of the world, we have to kind of live in this materialistic worldview. If we go into a school and we study sciences, we have to live in this materialistic worldview and get into the habit of thinking that it's okay to think upon the world as a thing that can maintain itself, that it is materially self-referring, self-maintaining, and that its being is granted purely by itself. But this is deep, 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 deep error. This is beyond a slightly askew view. It is the deepest of errors to fail to see the divine in everything. The unbroken being and presence of divine will and energy in the universe, in this very space where I am sitting in here right now, whatever space it is that you're sitting in. So the first thing I do, I do the two things in tandem, I suppose, but I bring into doubt mutual mass attraction. I undermine it as a very concept, because without it, there is no victory of the material over the spiritual, of the physical over the metaphysical. There is no such thing. If you don't have the Newtonian victory, you don't have the secular scientific victory. It's as simple as that. I mean, I don't mean that it's going to change everybody's mind right away. I'm meaning more from the point of view of faith. There's no necessary reason to give respect for those concepts, that they are purely intentions of will to power by those who want to live in a world that is divorced from God, that is purely a thing unto itself, that they are the the material beings within it, and that the whole of the supernatural conception of our being is just human fantasy in a purely natural world, naturally occurring, that all the narratives that we tell ourselves about our histories and so forth and our spiritual relationship with the divine are all just human, from the human capacity for fantasy, and not from any kind of deep reality. So the corruption is deep, and it's all the way up to the top in the Catholic Church now. It's in the seat of the Pope, and has been now for quite a while. It was what the 19th and early 20th century popes warned against modernity, was the victory of naturalism. And in a way, if naturalism is true, then what they've done is correct. But if naturalism is not true, if it is unfounded, then what they've done is apostasy. That's a serious accusation, a serious condemnation of what is going on in the church right now. But you can see it continuously as we, bias towards, human desire, human need over divine law, divine will. And it's not that the divine law is so arduous. Actually, the other path is the difficult path. It's the clumsy, messy path that never leads to happiness, that always makes us think we're going to be happy because we're doing what satisfies our material needs or our material desires, physical desires. But this is all just a misunderstanding. What God wants for us is our best happiness, our greatest peace. It's sometimes hard for us to see or accept this, and we think that we should be, able to act on our desires, or, end a marriage or whatever, to, be a bit loose with our morality, to be reasonable, about the human condition and so forth. So just to wrap this up, I'm going to give a little demonstration if I can. Pretty basic science demonstration. All objects of mass fall to the earth at the same rate, regardless of their mass. So we see there a very small stone weighing some amount of ounces, and another stone maybe approaching 10 pounds. It was pretty heavy. And they both fell at the same rate. Now, if there was some variation and they're hitting the ground, I haven't seen the thing yet. It would just be based on my release, possibly due to wind resistance on the smaller object, but it wouldn't be really enough, or not wind, but air resistance, but there shouldn't be enough in this setting, or that object should pretty much fall through. So they fall at the same rate. Well, by mutual mass attraction, this should not be the case. It is a logical contradiction with the very premise itself, the very hypothesis. Because there are two ways in which, by mutual mass attraction, by mutual mass attraction, there's one way in which objects should move toward each other. And by the formula, which is the mass of one object multiplied by the mass divided by the distance between them, is their gravitational attraction. We won't get into that in too much detail, but basically it's saying that there is a relationship that is mutual between them. Well, quite necessarily, objects with greater mass would have a larger gravitational acceleration than objects of smaller mass. And there's two ways in which this would then manifest. I mean, if we're saying that it's actually the motion itself, the acceleration, which is a very confounding idea, because we expect energy to move an object, and that its acceleration to be a manifestation of that energy rather than the acceleration being the motive itself. I mean, it's kind of absurd that acceleration is the motive. Acceleration is not an affect, it is the effect of some energetic affect. But if we're going to say that it is actually acceleration that moves objects, well, there's going to be a unique one for every object. So if it is acceleration we're talking about that is produced by the relationship between the objects, then larger objects would necessarily move at a higher acceleration than smaller objects. And it would make no difference that the Earth is so much larger and these objects are small. They would have the same kind of relationship. You know, if the Earth is even 1 million, attracting the one object which is 10 pounds, and the Earth is 1 million, or the other object attracted is 1 million, well, it's going to be moving. Let's say even the other object, the smaller object, was 1 pound. It would be moving, it would have an acceleration that is 10 times the amount of the other. It would move at a different rate. Now the problem is, through the Newtonian system, we have a simplification of the attraction of Earth to be just simply a function of Earth itself and not the object. We find the gravitational attraction for Earth, and then we have all objects move to Earth by that single motivation. Again, that's not mutual mass attraction. That's a singular attraction. If it's an acceleration, why? Why is it having this common effect on all things when that's not what the hypothesis claims? And secondly, if it's therefore, if it's an energy acting upon, well, it's going to move larger objects more slowly than it moves smaller objects. This is the first and fundamental critique that I make. I engage in more detailed mathematical work, but conceptually we can see that the idea is fallacious. And I will end this now, and we'll see if any of this is worth keeping.